Hi, this is Donna. Welcome to DD Paper Crafts. In today's video, I'm making a tray style box with a waterfall element on the top. So you can see if we open the tray, the waterfall element on the top starts to move as the tray pulls in and out. It's not a tricky project to put together, but there are elements that you want to let completely dry before you move on to the next stage of the project. You can resize the tray and the sleeve to suit whatever you need, and you can resize the elements on the top. This was initially inspired by a box which I saw on Pinterest, where rather than having rectangles on the top, each of these was half of a heart, and it was a Valentine's project. I couldn't find any construction methods, so I've come up with my own way of putting it together. The method of construction with the element of the waterfall element is very similar to the pop-up easel video, which I made over a year ago. It was in fact one of my earlier videos, and I will link that in the top corner if you'd like to have a look at that one as well. So without further ado, let's get started. We'll start with the tray element, and this is 5 3/4 plus a 1/16 times 7 3/4 plus a 1/16. Along the short side, make a pencil mark at the downward notch to the left of the 1 inch mark. So it's going to be 1/16 of an inch under 1 inch, like so. Move the cardstock along so the pencil line is in line with a track and score. So this will be the sides of the tray, and they will all be 1/16 of an inch under 1 inch tall. Rotate the piece 180 degrees. So here's our score line on the right hand side, and we're going to do the same. Mark at 1/16 under 1 inch. Move the cardstock along to a track. Make sure it remains vertical and score. We're going to repeat that, so I'm marking 1/16 of an inch under 1 inch, move the cardstock along to a track and score, rotate 180 degrees, repeat at the other end, move to a track and score. Now I'm using the 1 inch track to make my score line. I'm going to leave the cardstock where it is so the score line is in line with the 1 inch track, and I'm going to make a pencil mark 1/16 of an inch under 2 inches, and then move that along in line with a track and score. So these two panels here are going to give us our reinforced front end of our tray. Fold and burnish along all of the score lines. I'm going to start with a piece in this orientation, and I've got my 1 section on the left and my 2 sections on the right. We'll start by cutting up the first vertical to the horizontal, like so. Move along to the next score line and cut up to the horizontal, like so. Move along to the next score line and cut up to the horizontal, like so. Rotate 90 degrees, so here's my cut side. I'm going to remove this left hand side square, like so. And then I'm going to repeat that on this side of the cardstock. So our tray is looking like this. I'm going to take a wedge from each of the small glue tabs on the corners, like so. And I'm just going to double check that on this front outer flap here, I've completely removed the score line. And if anything, I'm just going to narrow that slightly, because that's going to tuck on the inside behind this side section to reinforce the front. Our tray is now ready for construction, and you might want to at this point think about if you're going to have any specific type of mechanism or something added to the front here to get the tray open and shut. I'm just going to have a notch cut out of the top, I am going to have pattern paper on the two sides and on the front of the tray. You don't need it on the back because that's going to be enclosed in the outer sleeve. So depending on how you're going to have your pull mechanism for your tray, you might want to think about putting that in place now before we put the box together. I will need my box to be in a tray form before I cut my notch. So I'm going to go ahead and make up the tray. So we will do this as we would do any tray style box by adding glue onto the corner glue tabs, and then we are going to pull each of the glue tabs around like so and just pull up the side, and you want to make sure you get a nice neat corner. We'll do that all the way around. I'm going to just start by just pushing this in and just making sure I don't need to trim the edges at all. That fits in there nicely, there's nothing catching. So I can add glue to this reinforcement section and then push this to the inside. So that is going to sit in there like so. I'm now going to add my pattern paper onto the two sides and the front of the tray, and then I will cut my notch out of the front. I have a piece for the inside of the box, and this is 3 3/4 by 4 3/4. I have two strips for the sides, which are 4 3/4 times 3/4, and a strip for the front, which is 3 3/4 times 3/4. Then my tray is now complete. I've got the pattern paper on 3 sides, pattern paper in the base, and I've cut my notch to get the tray out of the sleeve. So we can put that to one side to dry fully. The next thing we'll make is the sleeve, and for the sleeve you will need one piece, which is 7 inches times 10.5 inches. Along the 7-inch side, score at half and 1.5. Rotate, and on the long side, score at half, 4.5, 5.5, and 9.5. Flip the cardstock over so that you're working on the reverse, and we're going to put our markings in for our slot. Line your ruler up with the 2-inch mark down the left hand side. Make sure your ruler is running horizontally, and make a pencil mark between 2.5 inches and 3.5 inches. So your pencil mark will start 1.5 inches from this score line and will end 1.5 inches away from this score line. Move your ruler down to 6.5 inches. Make sure it's running horizontally, and again mark between 2.5 and 3.5 inches. You'll have a pencil mark which is 1/2 inch from this score line and 1/2 inch from the bottom of the cardstock. And then I'm going to join up the two lines. So this is indicating the channel that we're going to cut away to facilitate our waterfall mechanism. Fold and burnish along all of the score lines. Let's cut our sleeve. Rotate the piece. Your 1/2 inch tab is on the right hand side. So we'll start from the left hand side here. We're going to cut down the first, or cut up the first vertical up to the second horizontal, like so. And we're going to cut along up each of the verticals up to the second horizontal, all the way along, like so. Rotate the piece so all the cut edges are on the left hand side. We're going to remove this end rectangle like so, and then take a wedge from the ends of this glue tab here. We're going to cut up the second vertical from the left all the way up to the next horizontal, so we're removing this section in its entirety like so. Move up to the next section and cut and remove the end rectangle like so, and then move to the end section and remove the end rectangle like so. So this is how your piece will look. We're going to rotate it back so this section's in front of us. I'm going to take a wedge from the ends of these glue tabs here and here like so, and then I'm going to take a wedge from the end of this long glue tab like so. Okay, so that is how your piece will look. So what will happen is this box will be formed like so. This will have the slot in the top, and then the tray is going to sit inside. So the next thing we want to do is, before we cut our slot, add your pattern paper onto the top section here if you're going to have it. So I have a piece here which is going to sit on the top like so, and this is 5 1/4 times 3 3/4. Now you may have realised that the tray is 1/2 inch shorter than the sleeve, and that is so the mechanism can work. So I'm going to stick my pattern paper into place. I will add the side and the back strips on once the box is completed, but if you want the size for those now, you would need 2 pieces which are 5 1/4 times 3/4, and then a piece for the back which was 3 3/4 times 3/4. Once the piece is dry, you want to use your pencil marks to cut your slot into place. We're now going to make our sleeve, and if you watch how I put this together, you may find that you want to put this together in a slightly different order, so do whatever is going to work easiest for you. I'm going to add glue onto the long side to start, fold this over and then fold this end over the top, so I'm going to add some glue to the 2 smaller tabs, so, and add it to the long tab at the same time, and then I'm going to push the flap down inside the sleeve like so, tip the piece over, and then just using my score tool I'm going to burnish down the 2 small flaps on the inside. So this end is now enclosed. I'll add my pattern paper onto the sides of the sleeve so that everything can be drying at the same time, and then we will work on the mechanism element. For the mechanism, you will need a strip which is 5 1/2 inches times 1 1/2 inches. Along the long side, score at 7/8 of an inch, 1 3/8 of an inch, 1 7/8 of an inch, 2 3/8 of an inch, and 2 7/8 of an inch. Rotate, and on the short side, score at 1/4 of an inch down to the first score line, and 1 1/4 inches down to the first score line. So that is your waterfall mechanism. In addition, you will need a bar, and this is 3 inches times 1/2 an inch, and then we will have 4 panels which are 3 inches by 2 inches, and then we will have an additional panel which is 3 inches by 2 3/4 inches. We'll work on the mechanism piece. Fold and burnish along your score lines, and you want to fold them in both directions because this is the mechanism element which you want to move freely, So I'm going to fold and burnish it all in this way, and then I'm going to fold it over and burnish it in the opposite direction. Take your scissors. We're going to cut up each of these score lines within this section here, and we want to cut to the inside of the score line, like so, and then remove that rectangle. And you want to make sure you get a nice neat edge on the cut line along the top of the next section. Otherwise your piece could potentially catch as it's trying to move. So your piece will look like this. Bring in your sleeve and just check that this section here fits through the slot, which you can see that does fit through there quite easily. We now want to bring in our tray and slide your tray inside the sleeve. Now the tray, we've made adjustments on the tray, so it's a 1/16 of an inch smaller on all sides, so it should fit nicely into your sleeve, which that does. Pull your tray forward so that you can see the back edge of the tray. So there's the back edge, the end of the slot. I'm going to add glue to the top face of this section here and secure it through the slot in to the back of the tray. I'll use my construction glue because I do want it to be secure. So I'm going to turn this around and slot this end in against the back end of the tray and make sure that my strip is sitting parallel to the box, which it is. Bring the tray forward gently to the end of the slot. Just flip this piece back and just push in against. So I've got my one finger behind the back of the tray, flip this up, and I can get my other finger in the slot and just push that into place. Try not to move it and make sure that the remainder is sitting nicely on the top, which that is. So that is our mechanism in place. I'm going to push the tray back in. Make sure your tray is moving in and out. Just check you haven't got glue anywhere that you don't want it. The next thing we're going to do is take our bar element and we're going to add the bar to the end of the strip. So I'm going to add roughly a 1/2 inch channel of glue along the end of the strip, like so, all the way across. And then I'm going to sit my bar on the top so that it's equidistant across, like so. So that bar is there. I can just lift that up and just push that into place. So that's our bar. You can use tape if you'd prefer. You don't have to use wet glue for this. So that's that into place. And then I'm going to add about 1/2 inch of glue to either end on the reverse of the bar, like so. And then I'm going to put that down, make sure my strip remains in the center across the slot, make sure it's flat here and secure that bar into place. And then you want to leave that until it is completely dry. So we'll put that to one side. Bring in your 4 pieces to start with, and we're going to secure these on one by one. You might want to decorate them before you secure them on, or once they're in place, you can do that. So the original pieces were 3 inches by 2 inches. I've got pattern paper which I'm going to stick on the top. So these pieces are 2 3/4 inches times 1 3/4 inches. So I'll have 4 pieces of those. And then on top of there, I'm going to have another image or potentially a message on each one, which will be on an additional matte layer, and these will be 2.5 inches by 1.5 inches. But I will put those on once I've stamped, decorated those. And then in addition, for your final piece, you'll have a piece which is 2 3/4 times 2.5. So I'm going to add this first layer of pattern paper on whilst my other elements are drying. As I say, you might want to do this once everything is in place. Once your sleeve and your mechanism is all dry, just gently open the tray and you can see that the mechanism pieces start to work, and as the tray is opening they are folding over, so that is creating our waterfall effect. So I'm going to add one element at a time, check it, and then add on the second element. So I'm going to start with this one here, add glue onto the top section, make sure that your glue goes right up to the corners, but you don't want it to interfere with the score line at all. So I'm going to run that across. If you would prefer to use tape, then obviously that is a cleaner and less likely to get glue where you don't want it. So I'm going to stick my first card on and do it in this orientation because I want to make sure this is going to be my starter. So all my other cards which come in are going to line up with this one. So I'm going to have it across like so. So that's good. Make sure it's running parallel. I'm going to just burnish that down with my finger. I'm happy with that one. And then I'm going to open the tray and just make sure that that piece can fold over freely, which it does. So I'm quite happy with that. So that is folding over like so. Okay, so that's the first one in. I'm going to flip it over. You can do it matte with your fingers so that I can now access the next tab. Now, having watched this, you might think that it might be easier to add the tabs onto the strip and then add the strip into the tray. Obviously, this is I have only made a couple of these, one prototype and this one. So you might think that there's an easier way in terms of the order of construction. You do whatever you think is going to work for you. I'm now going to add glue onto the second section. Make sure I don't get it too near the score line for the top one. Then I'm going to take my next piece and sit that on top, get the edges lined up so that it's going to run parallel all the way down. I can flip this top one over, that will sit on there like so. Get rid of any excess glue. You really don't want there to be glue anywhere that there shouldn't be with this project. Make sure it's sitting in line, and then if I push my tray back in, open my tray, I can see that one flips over. So I'm going to do that with the remaining strip elements. And again, just do a quick test. And then for the final largest piece, I'm going to add glue on to the remainder of the strip up to the bar and secure that in place. Again, just making sure the sides line up. Add it up to the top of up to the score line, and that will sit in place there. So there we have our waterfall movement. And as I say, if you add each piece on individually and just test it before the glue's fully adhered, you will have time to make any adjustments to the movements. You want to make sure that this flow obviously runs smoothly as this one does. So there we have today's project. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel. And until next time, thanks for watching.